A very good evening. Welcome to Swarajya, and you're watching Swarajya Conversations. Joining me today is a guest who is an author and a journalist from Israel, Ashley Rindsberg. Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's good to see you again.
It's always good to have conversations with you. First of
Thank you.
all, India's freedom ranking in terms of freedom of speech has been ranked at 150 in the global world rankings. And this came as a not so surprising thing for many because, it just keeps on deteriorating over the last few years, and people are not even surprised. But when you look at who's worse off and who's performed better on that particular list, you have several dictatorships and authoritarian states from North Africa and different regions of the world. So I wanted to talk to somebody who's an India observer, but who can actually bring in that neutral perspective. So, what do you think about this entire incident, and what do you think of such reports being produced where America and other countries actually give this sort of validation for other countries as to how fundamentally correct their institutions are?
It's actually something that we've experienced here in Israel, the same phenomenon, the same organization, the Freedom House rankings. There was a year or two where Freedom House they gave Israel the like not free or like semi-free ranking, and it's like that is just patently absurd. You know what I mean? It's just Israel is easily more, at least today, more free, especially on a cultural level than the United States. You could have a Palestinian demonstration here, as you do probably every single day somewhere, saying destroy Israel. Not the police are unable to do anything about that. Like there's no legal mechanism to enforce any kind of method of putting down um, a demonstration, even one calling for the destruction of the Israeli state. So the idea that this is not free is just crazy. I mean, of course, there's it's not perfect. Show me the country that's perfect. But what we see from this, I think, is that there is an obvious political, geopolitical motivation, and that's of course what's going on with India. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it, especially given what you just said. I mean, if you have a full blown dictatorship higher up on the ranking than India, what you're seeing is that just it's the same thing as the media, right? It's almost like an extension of the media, and in a way, it is media because Freedom House. What is it actually? It's a publication. They publish, right? They publish a report. They publish stuff online, they're tweeting, etc. And it's the same exact calculus as the rest of the media. It's no different. They are part of the same establishment. They have the same biases and the same kind of worldview that would motivate them to do something as absurd as that. So I think that's really what it's all about. And I also do think that, I had a conversation about the New York Times yesterday with somebody who had been victim of a New York Times hit piece, and she was very upset about it. And what I told her was, don't worry. Nobody cares. Nobody cares anymore. And I think that's what's happening here is that people are starting to understand that it doesn't matter as much as it used to. And whatever this media organization wants to say about Israel or India or anybody else, it really doesn't matter, because what matters is what's going on the ground, number one, of course, and then number two is what are people actually paying attention to? And they're actually paying attention to social media. They're actually having those conversations. You've got people who are supporters and detractors. And most of the time, they are just going to hold their positions no matter what any third party organization is going to say. And I think to your point about the West having this commentary, running commentary on non-Western nations, you know, for all the anti-colonial talk that the West loves to engage in today, especially the liberal media establishment, they are 100% engaging in that stuff. They've taken physical colonialism and they've replaced it with moral colonialism. And it just, nobody believes in it because we've rejected colonialism outright as an entire system, and that means rejecting the moral colonialism as well. And I think this is the point we're at.
But where do you think this is actually coming from? Because do you think there is a sense of awakening in countries that have exclusively had that colonial experience, so to speak? Because a lot of the institutions, whether you speak of China or India, I mean, the nature of those countries and their democracies may be different. But at the end of the day, people and countries like India do accept the fact that they're largely fair and free, their institutions, and that they are democracies which, at least in principle, want to protect a lot of their fundamental freedoms that are embedded in the constitution. So, manner of speaking, do you think that there is this uh, a certain mantle that the West holds to declare some country as free and some country as not? But at the end of the day, it's that Westphalian system that is over the centuries, enforced upon certain countries to be followed.
Yeah, I think there's just an obvious bias. I mean, if you look at like look at Australia as, which is listed as free, um, or New Zealand for that matter, for the last 2 years, if you were in Australia and New Zealand, you weren't allowed out of your home in certain cases. And not only that, you weren't allowed to protest that fact. That is not free. I'm sorry. And okay, there was pandemic extenuating circumstances, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. There's always an extenuating circumstance. There's always a way to justify heavy handed methods. But when you look at what happened in Australia or what happened in New Zealand, what's still happening, by the way, and you see they suspended freedoms for 2 years, and that is not reflected in the rankings. Right? We still have Australia with a very pretty green color, and New Zealand the same. And I think that's really what this is all about. Say this is an us versus them type thing. It's a worldview type thing. Freedom House, I'm guessing, is based in New York. I actually don't know, but I would imagine something like that. It's an English speaking organization. We don't have Freedom House in a
Yeah.
different language. So I really think this is about this is the holding that moral mantle and say we get to decide, not you, not Indians. The
Yeah.
Indians don't decide if India is free or not. We decide, and I think that's the same thing, of course, with Israel. I actually haven't checked what Israel is now. I think it might be free, but again, we get we get a 76 on the rating. I see, where New Zealand, which has had complete lockdown and shutting down of civil liberties for the last 2 years, is at 99 on the rankings. 99. They're only 1 percentage point from being perfect. And Canada, where they had um, a complete disconnection of this group of people, the trucker convoy, where these truckers who
Yeah.
didn't want a vaccine mandate, they just completely withdrew these people from economic life, just like that. There was no due process. No one was tried. These people weren't taken to a court and said, okay, you were guilty. No, they were just removed from civil society in one day. And Canada scores a 98 on that list. So I think at this point it's pretty obvious. Mongolia is Mongolia really 84 out of 100? I mean, somehow that's hard to imagine. Maybe it's true, but I think that's what this is all about. Who gets to decide?
In fact, Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Adern are somebody who are really looked up to by certain elite circles in India, and I would imagine the West as well. Uh, Ultimately, they are the protectors of freedom of speech and other sorts of freedom in their own countries and around the world. And there's this entire lobby that rallies behind them very continuously and very constantly degrading India and almost giving it a neo-colonial treatment in some way. You brought up the truckers' protest. In fact, if you look at what happened in India with the farmers, with Khalistanis protesting, and there was an entire mess. And we remember when Justin Trudeau issued a statement saying that that he would stand very firmly with the farmers and their freedom to protest. But at the same time, he goes on to declare emergency in Canada when the same thing happens with truckers. So this sort of hypocrisy, I think the people are witnessing, and they're very aware of it, especially because we live in this age of information, and it's easy to penetrate to everyone's mobile devices, and we don't live in our own imaginary bubble anymore.
Right.
So, in that sense, where do you think this is headed, especially with the way in which um, people are turning more woke in universities? So, is there any semblance of things as to what can be rational and what can't be anymore?
I think for the past, 5 years and probably a bit longer than that, we definitely have had this pendulum swinging towards woke ideology, and woke ideology is all about power. It's all about trying to grab as much power and wealth, which is a form of power, um, from the establishment. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just the way things work. It's like the French Revolution. But where the French Revolution did it by means of physical violence, the woke people are doing it by subverting all methods of understanding our world, language, values, morals, um, different kinds of fields of inquiry, sciences. They're turning everything on its head, because once you do that, everything's up for grabs. And you could say, no, this is our realm. Mathematics is a woke realm as well, because 2 plus 2 equals 4 is actually a Western patriarchal concept, and we need to rethink that one as well. So that's now a woke sphere. And if it's a woke sphere, then they get to determine who are the privileged and who are the persecuted, where they see us. And that's again an inversion. So the persecuted people are now the privileged. If you can become persecuted, then you hold a special privilege. So everyone's trying to become persecuted. So it's this complete turning. It's like you've put the world into a tumble dryer, and and we're just going round and round and round. But I think we are seeing the end of this cycling of this epistemological cycling. It's coming to an end, and we're going to really see this change come November, where the United States has congressional elections. It's all but certain that the Democrats, who have really embraced woke ideology to an extreme, are going to have their hat handed to them. It's going to be disastrous for them. And this, I think, will be one of the major turning points, and the presidential election will be the next one. But again, because this is really about power, the moment the woke ideology stops serving the political establishment in America, which includes the media, of course, then you will have a rejection of that ideology. And you will also have the American media brand apparatus stopping to export it, because that's what's really happened to. That's why, if you talk to people in France, if you talk to people even like northern European countries, where they are typically or theoretically going to be more sympathetic to woke ideas, they reject it. They think it's ridiculous. They think it's completely, it's alien to them, it's foreign to them. They look at it as an American import that they don't want. They look at it like McDonald's and Starbucks, where the French are not interested in McDonald's and Starbucks, and they're not interested in saying a man is a woman is a man, whatever else they're saying. And I think once we have the American political establishment, again, including the media, which is a big piece of it, and the brand media, meaning Nike and the NBA and all those huge, powerful companies that have enormous marketing budgets that spread these ideas around the world. Once it no longer serves their establishment, they will stop exporting it, and it will stop being relevant to countries around the world.
Yeah, we saw that reaction, especially after Elon Musk said that the perma ban on Trump should probably be lifted, and he was in favor of that, and he was cancelled too. I mean, he's been cancelled several times. That's something that baffles me. The cancel culture where I see no uniformity. In the arguments that the Vokes represent, because Dave Chappelle is cancelled. Colbert is cancelled because he said something to his own liking. Uh, So in that sense, I mean, there is no uniformity. That nobody is even allowed to speak their mind. Yesterday, I was watching Bill Burr's Paper Tiger, and it's as if I had to watch it in a private space because I was afraid people are going to get offended if I watch this in public, because everybody's become so sensitive all of a sudden. You can't even
Yeah.
make a bloody joke in public.
Yeah, and I think there is a part of that that is positive. I think part of it to say, yes, we are all living in a society, and I think we do need to be considerate of one another as individuals and as groups of different kinds of people who have to share same space. And I think that's something we lost that in, I don't know when it was exactly, the 40s or the 1940s or the 50s in America. We lost common decency. Common decency used to be a thing that people practiced to say, I'm not going to walk around dressed in a way that might offend someone by showing different parts of my body, because this is a society, and it might not be nice for someone else to look at my bare belly or at my bare whatever. And let's be a little bit modest here, because there are many different types of people. And to say, we can expand that and to say there's also many people with different types of beliefs. Let's be just mindful of that fact. But then when it gets taken too far, and again, what happens is that it got hijacked by this sort of new will to power, where people are saying, oh wait, we can actually change behaviors with this thing, where this notion of being considerate, if we just pump it full of steroids, like moral ethical steroids, and then it's now a tool for us to modify behaviors. We can get people to do whatever we want, and that's exactly what's happened. We can say, oh, Bill Burr's joke, I didn't quite like minute 210, where he says something that could have really gotten in the disrupted my narrative, basically. Or Dave Chappelle, we talk about, touching the third rail of American politics. Dave Chappelle puts both hands on it when he says that the whole trans movement is privileged because it's a bunch of white men. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to say that in America. He says it, and then what's the response? Oh, Dave Chappelle, a black man, is now a white supremacist. That's the label he's been given. Or Larry Elder, who's a prominent media personality, he ran for governor. He's not supposed to run for governor as a Republican. That's not allowed. Larry Elder, who is a black man, is now a white supremacist. So if you go too far out of the it's not even an Overton window, because we talk about the Overton windows, what's acceptable in a
Yeah.
society as thought among us in general. This is not that. This is something very different. This is what's disrupting a narrative, a politically empowered narrative. And when you do that, the response is not saying, hey, Dave, could you just rethink that? Or, hey, Larry, I see where you're coming from. Maybe you should consider a different ideology. It's,
Yeah.
you are evil. And that's where we see the lie.
But you see, from your point of view, you are advocating for a decent amount of modesty, which, according to me, I think is perfectly fine, because there are certain set rules in any particular society from around the world, based on which civilizations have existed and thrived. And to a large degree, if we do agree and play by those rules, I think we do live in a very, very free and fair society that everybody walks home happy. But at the end of the day, I think the argument that is being put forth by a certain section of the folks is that we do not take very well to moral policing, and that's what it's become. That at the end of the day, you can't tell me what I need to do, and if I have to show my nipples on the street, I will.
Yeah. That is because what we've done is we've made the individual far more important than the collective, than the common society.
Where do you
There,
stand on that, between individual liberties and the common laws?
I think I stand in exact kind of a converse relationship to where American society at least is today, where it legally and within the official establishment of culture, government, politics, and law, the individual has been crushed. You have lost all privacy. Privacy is in America, at least, with the invasion of data into all of our lives. You have no privacy. You're not entitled to it. Forget it. Um, Mass surveillance in American government is now taken as a given. It's not something we ever would have accepted before. The individual has been completely crushed. The power of the government to do what it likes to you in America as an individual is almost unlimited. On the other side of that, in society, we've lost a little bit of a sense that there should be a common good, and it's not just about the me. So in culture, in American culture, the individual is everything. The individual is looms large over American culture. To say I should be able to show my nipples in the street, I should be able to do whatever I want, I can, protest where I want, how I want. If I don't like the Supreme Court decision, I'm going to go to that judge's house and I'm going to scare his kids because I'm me. And this is like this horrible imbalance that I believe should be exactly the opposite. I think that with under the government establishment structure, we should be empowered as individuals. The government should recognize it is answerable to me as an individual and not the other way around. And in the culture, I believe we should have a much greater emphasis on the common good, on living as a society and not just in a society. And this is where we are in America. We don't live as a society or as a community. We live in one. We don't do things that are for the benefit of all. We expect the all to do things that are to the benefit of one. And I think that's a huge, huge problem. I don't know how it gets solved in America. I think it is one of the country's greatest weaknesses. And again, I hope it's not something that gets exported by America's brand media to other countries.
This may be politically incorrect for us to both ask and answer, but do you think that the West is, in a way, imposing a system that is completely alien to certain countries and is expecting certain things which would probably be never derived out of those countries? For instance, you cannot ask Saudi Arabia to actually be democratic in the truest sense, but still this sit on the seat of the Human Rights Council. And same goes with China, with a lot of other countries who've never tasted democracy or who've never seen such freedoms in the past as a civilization. Uh, so, is it time for America and the West to realize that, regardless of what you advocate in principle, there are certain things which are hypocritical about you, which the world is realizing, and perhaps that your institutions cannot be replicated elsewhere around the world?
I think that, so much of America's so-called moral authority came from its economic success, where you have the world looking at this enormous economic engine that was doing so well for so many people and for so long, and you say they probably have something going for them there. Maybe we should consider that. Of course, there's also just raw power. America has an ability to exert its will because it is in control of so many of the economic structures that power the world. So if it wants to make a change to the SWIFT banking system or exclude an entire country, it can actually do that, which is insane. But I think what is happening is that America has made a series of horrendous decisions. Those decisions have been made by a governing elite who are insulated from the impact of those decisions. But those decisions are having a huge effect on the rest of the country, which means that we are seeing, for example, the American elite decided to back China's admission to the World Trade Organization as a permanent member, that basically robbed the American middle class of its livelihood. For 20 years, we have lost trillions of dollars to China because a few people in Washington wanted to say yes for their own good. And the result being there that America is no longer the economic powerhouse that it was in relation to other countries. China is now a rival to America economically. Other countries around the world are discovering their own economic powers, and they realize that those don't depend on America. You can trade with other countries around the world. You can make your country very wealthy. You can make leaps and bounds in technology and innovation. You don't need the kinds of natural resources that America has, or even the infrastructure that America has. It's all digital. So when countries start to realize that, they say, we don't really need these guys. And why are we following their orders when, like you said, we can see with our own eyes the hypocrisy. We can see with our own eyes that they're not living up to their own standards, and yet they're barking orders at us. And then they just say no, because they don't have to follow the American law, the American rule base anymore. They can make their own rules. And I think, again, that's exactly what we're seeing. China certainly makes its own rules. And I think in that regard, a more coalition based approach to China would probably be a good thing for the world, but
Right.
also for Chinese people. I don't think Chinese people love living under an authoritarian state. I don't think they love being dragged out of their homes and beaten so their home could be made into a quarantine center and there's no recourse. They just have to take it. So
That's
I
again
think
happening right now.
yeah, exactly. So I think we need. I think there's a new world order emerging. Is basically the upshot there, and a lot of it is because America shot itself not just in the foot, in both feet, in both hands, and soon it'll shoot itself in the head.
Your work has been very well received in India and around the world, obviously, because you wrote about something that was in the minds of thousands of people, but they were too afraid to say it out there. Because of the fear of being ridiculed, because they, in their own minds, may think that they are not legitimate enough to be writing against behemoth like the New York Times. But it's exceptionally well written, and it's been received so well. What's next for you?
I'm continuing to do the same kind of work because the media is obviously an enormously powerful institution or meta institution for all of us today. And Fran Lebowitz, the writer, she had this great quote. She says, "The media has replaced all institutions. Everything in our lives is filtered through media." So, that has been very important, but it's not the only institution. It's not the only power structure that is exerting its force on our lives to our own detriment. And I think at the end of the day, it's really saying, again, what kind of like what I had mentioned earlier, which is that I, as an individual, should be more empowered than a faceless government thing, sprawling apparatus that is designed to serve me, but I don't have an ounce of power in relation to that thing. I have no power. We have been completely disempowered as individuals in whatever society we live in, whether it's a democratic republic like America, where the Democratic National Party could whisper something to the CEO of Twitter, and all of a sudden, the president of America is taken off of Twitter. I mean, that is a crazy amount of power in relation to the individual. I think this is the real shift for me personally. This is what I'm looking at: is how these enormous institutions, how the establishment that is way too powerful has been kind of supercharged. It's that compounding effect. Just as we have a compounding effect in finance, we have a compounding effect of power. Over
Right.
time, these institutions have compounded in their level of power to the point that they have become virtually omnipotent. And this is what I'm looking at. How did this affect us during the pandemic? How does this affect us with other areas of our lives? Um, I've got an article coming next week in The Spectator about how Harvard University sort of inserted itself into the debate on the pandemic's origins at a very crucial time. And you think, why would they do that? What's the motivation? Why would they get involved? They're supposed to be supporting open inquiry, yet they're pushing for a certain view. And these are the questions that I'm trying to understand and expose. That's the big thing. Expose the inner workings of power, expose the motivations of power.
Wish you all the very best with everything that you do in the future, and I hope you can
Thank
join
you.
us for this conversation again.
Anytime, absolutely. Thank you so much,
It's
Sharan.
always a pleasure talking to you, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sharan. Have a great day.